Fort Lauderdale, Florida is forever linked to one of the world's most mysterious events. On December 5th, 1945, a squadron of 5 U.S. Navy torpedo bombers took off from the city's Naval Air Station. They never returned. The so-called Lost Patrol were the very first airplanes to vanish in the infamous Bermuda Triangle. But those wishing to explore a different side of this coastal city can plunge into the International Swimming Hall of Fame. The museum celebrates the accomplishments of the world's greatest aquatic athletes. But among the shimmering awards and medals is an item linked to one of history's most notorious leaders.
The object's about 4.5 inches long. It's not heavy. In fact, it's very, very light. It's a brown color. It's dry, and it looks very brittle. One end is flat, and the other end looks like it had been chewed on.
This cigar is at the center of an extraordinary stunt that pitted one man against the ocean's most deadly predator.
This is an unlikely tale of an old man and the sea.
It's 1978. For nearly 2 decades, tensions between the United States and Cuba have threatened to explode. Ever since the island's dictator, Fidel Castro, forged an alliance with the Soviet Union in 1961, all diplomatic ties between the United States and Cuba have been severed. But now, amidst this uneasy situation, one person wants to unite the two nations with sport. That man is a 65-year-old long-distance swimmer named Walter Poenisch.
Walter wasn't like other people his age. He was physical and strong and all about surprising people, doing things that they thought were impossible for him to do and maybe for anyone to do.
Poenisch has already completed several long-distance swims, including a 122-mile journey between Key West and the Florida mainland. And he's about to take on his greatest challenge yet, swimming from Cuba to Florida in the name of peace.
He thought, well, if someone could show how close our two people were, that he could tone down what was happening with the Cold War.
He charts a course from the Cuban capital of Havana to Florida's Little Duck Key. The 130-mile journey will be the longest ocean swim ever attempted. The swimmer estimates the Herculean feat will take him more than 30 hours.
He was a man of positive thinking. No one had ever done it, but he was convinced that he could.
But he won't just have to push himself to the physical limit. He'll have to contend with a terrifying foe.
When you go from Cuba to Florida, you have the added elements of sharks.
To protect himself, Poenisch comes up with what he thinks is a simple solution: a floating cage. He will swim inside while a boat pulls it at the same speed through the treacherous waters.
This was not a shark cage like you think of today. This is kind of shaped like a boat and made of chicken wire.
With his plan complete, Poenisch appeals to the Cuban government for special permission to enter the country. Surprisingly, the Castro regime grants the request.
He got word that he was going to receive the visa, and he was ecstatic.
On July 11th, 1978, Poenisch heads to Havana and meets with Fidel Castro. As a token of goodwill, Castro gives him one of his trademark cigars, now on display at the International Swimming Hall of Fame. Then, to much fanfare, Poenisch dives into the water, enters his protective cage, and begins his journey. For 34 exhausting hours, Poenisch pulls himself through the water while the surrounding shark cage keeps the hungry predators at bay. But just 2 miles from the Florida coast, the marathon swim comes to an abrupt halt. The bottom of the cage gets stuck on a sandbar.
One can only imagine what Walter was feeling. This could be the end.
With the shore in sight, the swimmer is faced with an agonizing dilemma. He can either give up on his dream or finish without the cage and risk being eaten by a shark.
Walter had trained for a lot of different conditions and in a lot of different areas, but one of the things that he wasn't prepared for was to outswim a shark.
So what will Poenisch do?
It's 1978. An extreme athlete named Walter Poenisch is attempting to swim from Cuba to Florida. To protect him from sharks, Poenisch is surrounded by a special metal cage that's being towed by a boat at the same speed he's swimming. But 2 miles from his destination, the cage gets stuck on a sandbar. Poenisch has just 2 options: give up or get out of the cage and risk being eaten alive.
Poenisch makes a fateful decision.
He spent years of his life to get this moment. He wasn't going to get it back. So he left the shark cage and continued on without it.
The determined athlete makes a mad dash for the shore, aware that every stroke could be his last.
Walter had to be terrified because there was a real possibility that he would be food for a shark.
After an hour, Poenisch safely reaches the shores of Little Duck Key.
When Walter hit the beach, the only thing he was thinking is, he made it.
The extraordinary stunt makes headlines around the world. And while the feat does little to thaw tensions between Cuba and the U.S., it shines a brighter light on the need for peace.
Walter Poenisch's great legacy is that he used his athletic ability for a higher purpose and higher cause.
In 2017, Walter Poenisch is inducted into the International Swimming Hall of Fame in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The cigar given to him by Fidel Castro is on display. It recalls a bold athlete who snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. G.I. Joe action figures from the 1960s. A 1976 Stretch Armstrong toy, still in its classic